The research station orbited a distant moon where 3 species worked together to study ancient ruins below. And nobody expected the day to change everything for one human engineer named Jake Carter, who spent most of his time fixing broken equipment in the lower decks while aliens from across the galaxy walked past him without a second glance. Zara was a Velcran warrior, from a planet where gravity crushed bones and mountains, floated in the sky, and her people stood 7 feet tall with skin that shimmered like oil on water and strength that could bend steel beams with bare hands. And she had never met a human before Jake because her people considered them fragile little things who broke too easily and talked too much about feelings. Recreation room buzzed with activity when Zara walked in with her squad mates who laughed about the upcoming strength trials. And she spotted Jake sitting alone on a bench reading something on his tablet. And her friends dared her toss it on the far weak human as a joke because everyone knew humans could barely lift their own body weight. And Zara never backed down from a challenge. She walked over with confidence that made the room go quiet. And Jake looked up with confusion in his brown eyes when her shadow fell across him. And before he could speak, she sat down right on his lap with all her weight, expecting him to crumple or cry out or beg her to move. And her friends waited to laugh at the pathetic human. But Jake did not crumble, and his body stayed solid beneath her like reinforced titanium. And surprise flickered across his face, but he did not push her off or complain, and instead, something strange happened deep, in his chest where old instincts slept and his muscles tensed without his permission, and strength he never knew existed began to wake up cell by cell. Zara felt at first because her people were sensitive to energy shifts and power fluctuations, and the human beneath her suddenly felt different, like a reactor starting to hum with building energy, and she tried to stand, but his hands moved faster than she thought possible and gripped her waist to keep her in place. And his eyes changed from confused to focused with an intensity that made her breath catch at them. Other aliens in the room stopped laughing because they sensed it too, and the air around Jake shimmered with heat that should not come from a human body, and his grip on Zara tightened until she felt pressure against her reinforced bones, and fear touched her heart for the first time in years because nothing should be able to make her feel pressure. Jake stood up with Zara still in his arms like she weighed nothing, and she was 300 lb of muscle and bone, and he held her at eye level, while his body burned with power that came from somewhere deep in human genetics, where survival mechanisms hid and waited for the right trigger, and his ancestors had fought predators with nothing but will and rage, and that same fury now poured through his veins. Her squad mates jumped up, ready to fight, but Jake moved with speed that blurred and set Zara down gently before they could reach him, and his chest heaved with breath that steamed in the cool air, and his skin glowed with heat that made the metal floor ping and crack beneath his feet, and everyone stared because humans were not supposed to do this. Zara touched her waist where his fingers had gripped and felt the ghost of his strength, and her people prided themselves on power, but this human had matched her without trying. And she looked at Jake with new eyes that saw not a weak creature, but something dangerous that had been sleeping, and she had woken it up with her arrogance. The station commander rushed in after alarms triggered from the energy spike, and she was a stern woman named Claire, who had seen many things in her 30 years commanding mixed-species crews. But she'd never seen a human glowing with enough power to register on sensors, and she demanded answers that nobody could give. Jake stumbled back against the wall, breathing hard while the fire in his blood slowly cooled, and he looked at his hands like they belonged to someone else. And scientists would later discover that humans carried dormant abilities locked in their DNA, waiting for extreme stress or threat to activate. And Zara sitting on him had triggered his body into emergency mode where normal limits disappeared. Medical teams scanned Jake for hours while he tried to explain what he felt, and it was like every cell in his body remembered how to be stronger, faster, harder, and the doctors found changes in his muscle density and bone structure and neural pathways that should take years but happened in seconds. And they theorized that humans evolved this as a last resort survival mechanism. Zara visited him in the medical bay after the tests, and she sat carefully in the chair beside his bed and admitted she'd been wrong about humans and asked forgiveness for treating him like a joke. And Jake smiled weakly and said she could not have known. And something passed between them that was not quite friendship, but held the seeds of respect. Word spread through the station, and then the galaxy about the human who awakened hidden strength, and other humans began testing their limits, wondering if they too carried this power dormant in their bones. And some succeeded in small ways, while others found nothing. And scientists debated whether all humans had this potential or if Jake was unique. The Velcran Council invited Jake to their home world, which was an honor rarely given to outsiders, and Zara went with him as his guide. And when they arrived at the crushing gravity planet that would kill most species, Jake walked on the surface without assistance while his body adapted, and the Velcran elders bowed to him as an equal. He spent months training with Velcran warriors, learning to control the power that could activate in moments of need. And Zara trained beside him as his partner, and they developed techniques that combined human adaptability with Velcran discipline, and something grew between them that neither expected when she first sat on him as a joke. The galaxy watched as humanity revealed what they could become when pushed in species that once dismissed them as weak. Fragile things began to reconsider, and trade agreements changed and military alliances shifted, and humans found themselves respected where before they were tolerated. Jake returned to the station different than when he left, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew what lived inside him. And Claire promoted him to security chief because they needed someone who could handle threats that normal humans could not, and Zara requested transfer to the SAM station. To continue their partnership, they stood together on the observation deck watching stars wheel past, and Zara asked if he was angry about that day in the recreation room. And Jake laughed and said it was the best joke anyone ever played on him because it showed him what he could be. And she took his hand in hers, and their fingers intertwined, while two species that seemed so different found common ground in strength and respect. The research station continued its work studying ancient ruins and distant worlds. But now it was protected by a human who could match the strongest warriors in the galaxy, and his Velcran partner whole-earned that underestimating others was the greatest weakness of all. And together they proved that true power comes not from what you are born with, but what you choose to become when challenged.